was in the United States Army as a surgeon. And guess what? He did go to free territory. Then the owner talked about freeing Dred, but he died. Who took over? His wife. His wife said, "There's no way I'm losing money. You're valuable. You have a skill, a lot of money." So did Dred actually be freed? No. Your favorite Chief Justice, I know he's your favorite because I think somebody told me that when you were inaugurated on March 4th, he stared right at you and we didn't like him and he didn't like you. Roger Coney said, "Dred, you can't sue. You're not a citizen of the United States." Now, I started to bring this up, and this is very technical, and you know it is, and it's very hard to discuss and so forth. We have to come down to the conclusion of, was secession legal? The other thing is the equality between the races. White men can vote. And you're talking about, you want this free, but that is exactly what the majority of Americans, now Mr. Lincoln, I've watched you enough and read about things what you said in the paper after becoming president to know you're no stupid politician. In fact, my wife will tell me, has told me over and over, I'm not a politician. My way, since I got it out, was the best way. Not being a politician. You know what it takes to be a politician, sir? One word. To be a good politician. And our country wouldn't be where it is today if it wasn't for that word, compromise. Great compromise. 3/5 compromise. Missouri compromise. Compromise of 1850. The southern states did not feel and did not like the idea of the northern states telling us how to deal with their own problems. We were the ones with the slaves. We were the ones falling further and further behind in agriculture. That limited us because we grew the cotton, but who milled it? Lowell, Massachusetts. Where was that at? It wasn't the South. It was the North. And a lot of these Southerners that I knew and loved, including my own family, did not want modernization. And what most people don't understand is how many slave owners were even in those 15 southern states. Not as many as you think. I've had people come up to me, Mr. Lincoln, and say all people in the South owned slaves. They had no clue, and they thought all of us were Simon Legree, who beat our slaves. We would buy a slave for $1,200 or $1,500 as a skilled servant, and then take a whip to it. Well, how much work are we going to get out of it? But see, the minds of some of the people in the North is, well, if it's written down, it's got to be true, because Harriet Beecher, whose father was a preacher, whose brothers were preachers, she wanted to be a preacher, but no, she's a woman. But the thing of it is that these people start thinking they're all like that. I found that out in the Senate. That some of my colleagues would start to mistreat me or think of me as a certain way, but I wasn't allowed to think of them in any certain way. Those Negroes in the North, do you think they lived any better than they did in the South? Some of them lived a lot better in the South. Except, which I will admit, because he's going to bring it up, they had the option of leaving. Some of the immigrants that came over here lived far worse than some of the slaves that we had in the southern states. And I'm going to say it again, they had the option of doing what?
being educated, in your life or family, the ladies would teach your children, and some of the slaves would be with them because their parents were out working in the fields. And when they found out that they were educating them, they would either move the people, the families away, split the families up, or they would punish the women that had been inappropriately educating those that were slaves. Now let's get back to Dred Scott. You said Dred Scott freed, but freed by his owner.
He died a slave.
But listen, you said that his owner was the one
died.
that came free.
His
And
wife would not set him
his
free.
wife would not.
She would not. No.
Okay.
She would not, and she did not.
But
Dred died
But she should have, because he was the head of the family, and his decision should have been the one that was kept.
Didn't work that way.
I know it didn't. That's why, but it should have. And that would there wouldn't have been
That's
a Dred
Mr.
Scott
Lawyer.
situation.
You look at things and you say, this is the way they're supposed to be, they're not always that way. And why didn't most southern states want to educate the slaves? Because
They did.
Well, because I'll tell you why.
They would rebel.
Not necessarily.
Not necessarily, but they probably would.
You know, my slaves were run off my plantation by your soldiers in 1862. They didn't run off as soon as I left.
Because you didn't tell them that I had emancipated them.
Oh, yeah.
And you told them they would have run away.
Mistaken. They came and threw them out of the plantation in 1862. Your Emancipation Proclamation did not, well, I don't want to get started on that. Okay, let's go to the Emancipation Proclamation. Mr. Lincoln will admit that the Emancipation Proclamation only freed the slaves in the sections of the South that were still rebelling against the Union. Now listen. If we separated ourselves, just like the United States, I ask people this all the time, when did the United States become United States? And I threw out dates, like, for instance, April 19th, 1775, July 4th, 1776, April 30th, with Washington's inauguration in 1789, September 1st, September 1783 with the Treaty of Paris. When could we actually call ourselves the United States? But if we haven't won the war until the treaty was signed, September 1783, were we the United States? Were we? When were we United States, young lady? We haven't won the war yet. All we did is dangle a little piece of paper up and said we hold these truths and said we're separating from Great Britain. Did we have the right to come? But see, Mr. Lincoln, the whole thing behind what Mr. Lincoln's trying to say, you'll probably agree with me, is that he does not recognize the Confederate States of America at all.
Who are they?
See? He does not recognize the fact that we left and formed our own country just like we left in 1776.
If you had won the war, but you didn't, if we won the war against Britain, so we did.
How many of those representatives
Because we-
hanged because they were wanting to separate?
You mean shot?
Hanged? Shot?
Oh.
Whatever. There's a number of them that signed that document that didn't live. The British caught up with them and killed them.
You're right.
And that word traitor, you can only really, I guess, in your opinion, if one side wins, the other side are traitors. Only if you win. That doesn't make any sense to me. Either you're a traitor or you're not a traitor.
If you were part of the organization, you were with. In other words, if we were still with England, when we rebelled against England, we became traitors. When you left the Union, you became a traitor.
When I left
I
England,
follow the Constitution.
you said I left
the
with
rules of
England.
our land.
You said I left with England. And did you say I just left with England?
Well, the hesitation between them, I stated England, then I stated you all. That's a southern term, you all.
Mr. Lincoln, I was into people. I went up to, when we moved to Mississippi, it wasn't even a state yet, you might not even be aware of this, and my father sent me to a Catholic school, other than Protestant, we were Baptist, for 2 years. And then I came back, and eventually I went to Transylvania University, and eventually I ended up at West Point Military Academy that you're aware of in the state of New York. I was educated. I also served in the House of Representatives, Senate twice, fought for the United States in the Mexican-American War. And what did you do? From what I've read and heard from him, right there, that you wrote a spot resolution, one of the exact spot where the American Revolution started. When it's so, not the American Revolution, the Mexican War started. It was so easy.
You sure it wasn't the American Revolution?
No, it was the Mexican-American War.
Okay.
You had the Nueces River, you had the Rio Grande. And Pope, a Democrat who you didn't like because you were a Whig, said,
Well, he was a Democrat.
well, now let me finish.
Maybe.
He sent troops to protect our border. The Rio Grande. Now, Santa Anna was only elected president of Mexico for 7 times, and he was about as trustworthy as your Secretary of War for Pennsylvania. You probably don't even want to admit that. You had a Secretary of War for Pennsylvania that, see, the newspaper said he was, the only thing he wouldn't steal was a red hot stove. So you wanted to know the exact spot? And I just told you where the exact spot was, on the United States territory. And then he's going to say, well, you had that war, so you could get on
You're
this
getting a
territory.
little bit offhand. We're talking about the Civil War. We're talking
I don't even
about
call
you
it,
left the Union.
I do not call
And you're
it,
talking about all the education
I do
you
not
had.
call it a civil
Why
war. I
didn't
call
you
it, it's a
do the
war.
same with your
It's a
slaves?
war between the states.
Why didn't
A
you?
civil war is one section of the country trying to take over the other section, like the English Civil War between 1642 and 1649, and maybe you don't know what happened to the king at the end of the English Civil War.
What would have
His
happened
head was
at the end of
beheaded
the war
just like his grandmother.
if we had gone to the Southern seceders, Robert E. Lee, Forrest, and others that fought from the South, exactly what they did? What would have happened if we had executed them?
That's not your nature, Mr. Lincoln.
That's exactly
You're
right.
You're not going to
That's
try
exactly
to tell
right.
me.
Now, what did we have?
Not the man who wrote with malice towards none. I'm looking at the time, Mr. Lincoln. Maybe we should wind this down so Mrs. Davis and I can talk somewhat. But we also, if you agree to that, maybe we should take some questions. Allow some time for some questions because we've been almost putting on the boxing gloves. How many are kind of going back and forth watching your faces? Wings? Let's finish. His policy, he probably would explain that his policy, that he did not want to hang. Now, he didn't want to hang me, Robert E. Lee, or any of the others that were accused of treason like his. He's not there to say.
My dear husband, I would like to hear it from him.
I'm doing that, Miss
I think it's
Davis.
a to be.
Well, I'm going to since I finished this sentence.
He
And now I forgot what the sentence was. What was the question?
I believe
Go ahead.
that you mentioned before that if Dred Scott had been allowed to go free, the reason the wife that was left did not free him because it was valuable money. Could we have solved the problem if we had set aside $174 million to buy the slaves, so that we don't have to continue fighting? If we had done that, if we did, and we were rejected, and the war went on, why didn't, when you realized that your slaves were good workers, why didn't you educate them so that they could be better workers and be able to think for themselves, and then start paying them, not all at once, but gradually, reward those that were good workers, and allow them to earn their freedom and grow into it. Those that were not willing to do that or did not want to do it, were not capable of doing it, then allow them to go their own way. That would have prevented. You said before that if the war had not taken place, slavery would eventually have died a natural death. I felt that also. That's why when I came in my inaugural address, I did not want the fight. I did not want you to secede, but you needed to come back and be part of our body, this great nation.
That's a great, great, great little thought. But I was surrounded by, like you were surrounded by in your family, a lot of men that were fire eaters. Better off without them. We have our own country. We don't want to be with them. And I will say this. Hot-tempered men don't solve any issues. That's why you're looking at me as President of the Confederacy and not Robert Brett. You go over there. Well, they're a lot different than I was. So, Mr. Lincoln, I think that, did you eat your knuckles all, when you squeeze, I saw you squeezing your hand. Did you have anything that you wanted to say before you ask any more questions? And I know I kind of run out of things to ask you until the next time we meet.
My thought was, it's a shame we had to fight. I wish that we could have come back together through Congress debate and come up with either purchasing the slaves, finding a way of making slaves an indentured service for a certain period of time, and allowing them to earn their freedom from the existing slave owners, because not all slave owners were hated. I believe General Forrest, when the war was over, his slaves stayed with him, and he treated them, he paid them, he took care of them. Johnson, he gave property to his slaves, and he became president, that they could live the rest of their life. And many of the slave owners were willing to do that. And it's a shame that we weren't able to get back together and we had to kill 620 or more thousand men to prove a point.
Well, maybe you don't know this. You probably never heard of Benjamin Montgomery.
I have no idea what he did.
Well, he was a former slave of myself and my brother Joseph. Now, this is very complicated. I'm going to say it in about 30 seconds. My older brother Joseph had a gigantic plantation, and I had 1,000 acres of that he never fully deeded to me, and I never got the full deed to it until 1881. Benjamin Montgomery and his two sons, former slaves, bought the plantations, but due to the river, Mississippi River, changing course, and the Union troops coming in and burning hurricane in 1862, they kept our plantation home, but they went and destroyed all of our furniture, a lot of things that we owned. After the war, Joseph Moe Brothers sued the United States government to get it back. It was very, very complicated after the war to deal with the United States government. Freedmen's Bureau also was on Briarfield and Hurricane Plantation until it flooded so much that Benjamin Montgomery folded on the debt. That's as far as I know. So I look at the time, Breen and I are supposed to be doing some talking too, and Samuel Cooper has got a chance to stand up and say a few words. And my vice president, Alexander Stephen, Alex, served in the Congress. What Congress was that? The one after mine, Mr. Lincoln. 47, 49. What was that? 32nd Congress. They served in Congress together. Believe it or not, became good friends, and I was also very good friends with William Zoar. Spent many months at his home healing my eye. And he says, it's a shame all this happened. It did, because if you listen to Maureen and I, that we begin to talk, we're going to talk about our friendship with many people from the North. And it gets complicated. It's not this simple, okay? I know some of you want to think it's simple. Oh, they could have done this. They? Who's they? I'm going to look at your period of time and say, why didn't you do this? That's what I'll probably get.
Could we finish up by allowing 2 questions?
Sure, it's in for it. As long as I don't get long-winded, I'm going to go over here and stand by my wife in case I go to get a question that's long-winded. She'll kind of
We have 2 questions
tell me to
for...
stop
I
talking.
think you want to know.
Oh, did you hear that? Don't ask me a question. She said I talked enough.
Yes.
I'm from the New York Herald, and I feel I must interject the humanity of both of you folks. And what happened to you during the Civil War, whatever you want to call that conflict. Both of you suffered probably the worst event that could happen to a father. Would you please tell us a little bit about that?
Well, as a father, I had 2 of my sons lived in the White House. The other son was at Harvard. One of them went in the White House because of living conditions, the open sewers and the like. They caught malaria or something such as that. Because of poor sanitary conditions, became very ill. And Willie lost his life due to that while we were in the White House. And it was a tragedy. Absolutely. He was I wouldn't say my favorite son, because all 4 of my sons were important to me. But he was the one most like me, because when he was ciphering, I could tell each step was the same step that I followed. And so that was very important to me. My other son, that was in Harvard, wanted to join me the service. Mrs. Lincoln did not want him to, because we had lost Eddie in Springfield and Willie at the White House. And she just couldn't bear to lose another son. So he wanted to go fight, so he did become part of the staff for General Grant. And that was kind of the sorrow and really the worry we had whether or not he would be safe.
Breen and I had 6 children between 1852 and 1864. It took us 7 years to have a child. I don't want to go into that. We don't need to. But we had our, Samuel, Margaret, Jefferson, our 4th born. Joseph was most like me in some ways, most like his gifted, very intelligent little boy. Jefferson Jr. was more on the lazy side. They like to play, and he went out to the veranda of the house on Clay Street in Richmond, and that's the second floor. You kind of have a place you can, and he fell off the window ledge and cracked his skull. Like, he died in our 5 minutes. Also during those times in Richmond, we had, well, first of all, Montgomery, we had William born December of 61, and then we had Winnie, Marina Ann, named after her mother, born in the end of June. So she was a child 7 months when her little Joseph died. So we've had a lot of tragedy, and in a sense, that made me realize that a lot of women felt during the war. They lost their husband, their brother, their father.
Thank you, Mr. President.
You're welcome.
In conclusion, I received probably daily death threats. From the time I was elected, threats of my life, threats because I was ruining a style of living for those that live on the plantation. Ladies would write to me that I should take my own life rather than subject the possibility of them not being able to have those slaves. The challenges of knowing that we sent soldiers out to fight, and they weren't winning, and yet they were losing thousands of lives. When Grant and Lee would go against each other, we usually lost more than Lee. And it was just tragic. I found myself at night just shaking my head and wondering why. I went to my knees many, many times. I called for prayer and fasting 9 times during my administration, telling people to go to their choice of place of worship and get down and pray and ask God, what does He want us to do? How can we end this conflict? Thinking that the South was possibly outpraying us. Before every battle, both sides prayed. Both sides wanted to be free from harm. Both sides wanted to win. And God above, what can we do? Can't answer those prayers. It's a tragedy. 620 million per 1,000 people that lost their lives and they're all Americans. From this, and the reason we gather this weekend here is because it's history. We need to look why it happened. How can we have compromised? We have prevented it. What can we do today that would prepare